Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to flex our Power Automate muscle by leveraging our site requests, and the user can submit the request. It's going to send a confirmation email using Power Automate and then send an email to the approver. The approver would then receive an email notification in Outlook and be able to approve or decline the email right here in Outlook. Automated process, very nifty. Very cool trick to a skill to understand and to leveraging your process. Let's get started. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get started with the first step of the automated process for the site request. So here we have the home page of the intranet, and where users can do, they can go to the site request over here on the quick links, and then that will launch the form that we created in the previous videos. So once they fill out this form and click submit, we want to automate that process. So the first thing we want to do is to send an email confirmation acknowledging that we received a request and that it's been submitted for approval. The second part of our process that we're going to cover in this video is the actual formulate the approval process. So let's go ahead and get started. So here we have the flow screen, Power Automate, where you can go ahead and create your own flow. So we're just going to go to new and then automate it. So out of all of these, we're going to use automated because we want this flow to trigger when a new entry is submitted within the site request list. So here we just give it a name, we just call it site request, and select the trigger of when the item is created. So once this creates, the first thing we love to do, and this is a best practice, if you followed any of my Power Automate videos, you know that I'm a real stickler about naming our different actions. So here we're just going to name it when a site request is created. And this just really helps us track on where we are in the process, especially when we start to select tokens. So in the site address, let's just go ahead and select the site where our site request will live, and that's going to be our site request site. And then the list name is going to be site request. You will see that we have other options here, but the site request, the other ones are lookup. The site request is where the main data from our Power App form gets dropped into. So let's just go ahead and select site request. If you click on advanced options, there's a filter that we can apply, but that doesn't fit our scenario here. So let's just go ahead and create new step. So now that we have it wired up to trigger listening to our list, the first thing we want to do, as I mentioned before, is to send the email confirmation. So here we're going to select Office 365 Outlook V2 at the time of this video, and we want to send the email to the person that actually created the request. So in order to determine that in a dynamic fashion, we want to use dynamic content. And because I have this field selected for the to, it's actually going to filter out my available options for sending emails. And here we just want to say created by email. And then for the subject line, we want to do something that says your site request has been received, and then maybe for, and then the name of the site that they received, that they specified in the form. So in that scenario, it's going to be the site name field. So, this just adds a little bit more personalization for this particular instance of the site request, and we're naming the actual item. Now, once we have that, we can fill in our body. I have this already copied in a notepad, and really it's just content. There's no dynamic pieces here yet. So we just have content, and I have a placeholder where I want to put in some dynamic pieces. So here I have the dear, then primary owner. We just go ahead and replace that with the actual primary owner name. So let's just do add dynamic content. And I can filter these if I just start typing in the name of the field. So Prima. And here I can just go ahead and select display name for the primary owner. And then there's a comma. Now you notice that we're actually sending this to the created by email. Actually, I want to flip-flop this a little bit. So let's remove this. Let's actually send this to the primary owner's email. So that's going to be primary owner email. Because remember, when you fill out this form, there's a primary owner field, and this doesn't necessarily have to be the person creating this site request, right? So this is just saying that this is the actual owner or the primary owner for the site once it's provisioned. So they can potentially be two different people. So to cover our tracks and to make sure we have both scenarios covered, what we can do in the advanced, go ahead and put the created by person in the CC field. So this is going to be the created by email. But when we create the body of the email, we're going to address this to the person who was specified as the primary owner. And I think that's going to help us cover those different scenarios. The other thing we want to do in the section here within the body of the email, we want to go ahead and fill these in with the tokens that represent the different data point or data item from that site request field. But before that, what I love to do is to put a bold or some type of different treatment on these other callouts similar to this. So that way when you receive the email, you will see this in a little bit once we receive the confirmation. You will notice that this bold treatment to these field types really kind of helps with the scanning of the body of the email. And this is something we want to carry over as well when we see it's in our approval. Okay, so now that I have that treated, I want to put in the dynamic content. So let's just, again, filter on the word site. And we want to get the site title. In this scenario, it's going to be the site name field, then the site type. One thing to note, you have two options for site type. Site type is going to be the control or the field with the various options, and then you're going to have the selected option. So in our case, when we're dealing with a drop-down, we only want the selected option and the value of that selected option, and that's why we select out of these two. That's why we use the site type value. Now, as far as data classification, let's do another filter on the word data. And then same scenario here with the data classification, we're just going to use the data classification value. Estimated user, I'm going to just type in EST. Here's my estimated user value. And then the site request number, because we're dealing with a SharePoint list, each entry in that SharePoint list will dynamically get a unique ID. And we can just leverage that just for our internal reference. Because if you're calling or inquiring about this particular site request, you can reference it by the ID versus the verbose site name or things along those lines. And that would just be an easier identifier and an exact match identifier, which would be great in our scenario. Outside of this, we want to give this a rename, again, following to my best practice and naming convention. So we want to send an site request confirmation. So that way it's very clear on what type of email this is, right? And these names that we're giving right here on the site actions, or these various actions within Power Automate, have to be unique within the global scheme of things within your entire Power Automate. Okay, so this should be enough for us to test. So what we want to do, let's just go ahead and save this Power Automate. We can leave this window open as long as we're saved. Let's bounce back over to our Power Apps form. And let's just give this a name. So it's just going to be our WAO. Let's call this the South Carolina location. And then this all feeds back to the initial video in our site request and how we're, our grand scheme of thing of what we're trying to achieve. So because this is a partner site for an external user, our external partner will be WAO. And then the location number for South Carolina is going to be this K468999. Estimated users, less than 1,000. Classification is confidential. And then again, this is where I can either specify my name as the site submitter, or I can specify someone else's name. So I'm going to do my name as the primary site owner, and then I'm going to have Madison as my backup. And then we just go ahead and submit this. Okay. So now that's submitted, what I can do, I can pop open Outlook, monitor my email, and we should receive, let me delete some of these previous ones that we're using for testing and prep for this video. And we should receive a confirmation email if everything is flowing correctly. Now this may take a few seconds, especially for very new Power Automate. So it usually take a few seconds for it to warm up and then to actually send the email. So if you don't get it within the first 2 to 3 minutes, I wouldn't panic. Just give it some time. Another thing you can do is you can monitor it. So there's the email, but if you wanted to, you can monitor it. So if we go back to our Power Automate, and just to see if this, if it fired, but there were an error, or what was the case for this particular instance, this is where you monitor the run history. And here we have a success status, so we're good to go. And we kind of knew that coming into this email coming into the screen, because that email finally came through. So now if we click and look at the body of the email, you would notice that the one thing that catches my eye right away, because it's it has a bold treatment, is the details of this request. And that's the reason why you like to bold this type of data, because this is really the meat of the request, right? So other than that, we got our filler text and we're good to go. Again, there's no action here. This is just a confirmation email. So now we need to do the real meat of this process, and that's the approval action. So now our requester received the confirmation. Now let's do a new step and request approval. So here we have several options. We're going to focus in on the start and wait for approval, because this is going to send an approval request and then pause, aka wait for an answer, either approve or or reject it. Again, before we get into the meat of this, we want to send site request approval, right? And then on our drop down, we have a few options here. We want to approve, reject, and wait for the first response. This action allows you to send to many different approvers, and you can decide based on your business requirement that if you send this off to 5 people, all 5 must approve before you can proceed. Or if you want to send it to a group of people, or you only send it to one person, the first to respond is going to be the option that you're waiting on. So our title field would be the subject line that's going to be in this approval request email notification. I have the subject line here. I have a placeholder for dynamic content. Again, we just want to use site name. In that case, I was going to keep things dynamic. And then we want to send this to, I'm going to hard code this for now. We want to send this to Andre. So I just start typing Andre in the first name. It's going to do a search against our Active Directory. And then here we can select Andre from the list. Now the details are going to be the body of that approval request within the system. And for that, we're going to start that with this text here that says the following has been submitted for your request. Notice another thing that we have here. In the details, this is actually expecting markdown syntax, not HTML, that we use in the body here. So here, this was HTML. I had a nice WYSIWYG editor for our standard formatting for text. If I want to get very granular, I can switch over into HTML mode, and then you can see based on my WYSIWYG editor, here I'm just bold, and then put in the HTML text for bold, and then you see my line breaks to kind of separate things per line. It did all of that for me using this WYSIWYG editor. But when I'm in the approval piece, this actually uses a special syntax called Markdown. And if I erase this content, there is a placeholder. Oh, I probably can't get it back. There we go. So there's a placeholder. When this field is empty, it gives you the URL for the Markdown reference. And that's going to be that AKA/MS/approval detail. So you can actually navigate to there, and then that will give you all the syntax. And we'll walk through that in a second. So here I have the following text for approval. And I actually want to use that same text that I used in the previous. And I have to be careful because this is going to use Markdown. So I have to be very careful on even the spaces that I have here. So here I have, instead of here are the details for your request. Let's just say for the request. So here are the details of the request. And then again, we just have all the information here. Because we're using Markdown, I'll show you in a second how to get this unordered list. But for now, we can't use this. So I have to erase all of these from that copy and paste. Let's get rid of this one and then this last one here. Okay, so now I'm ready to go ahead and put my spaces in. Again, let's drop in our dynamic content, filter on site. Site title is going to be the site name field. Site type is going to be the value there. Here we have the data classification value, and then the estimated user token, and then the site number. Again, this is just going to be our ID. Okay, so now we have all of that in. So now what we want to do, I'm trying to get rid of some of these spaces. Actually, let me get rid of this signature. That's not needed in this context. And now what I want to do, I'm going to switch over to the markdown reference. Again, if you go to that AKA-MS / details, I have it bookmarked here. And that's one of the things that you will find that when you start doing this type of Power Platform development, bookmark those needed resources so that way they're right there at your fingertips. So here, if you scan through this markdown, it does give you several scenarios on how to format the body of your approval request. And in our case, what we're looking for is how to do an ordered list or unordered list where we're actually just using bullets, not numbers. So in our case, we just need to do the hyphen and then the space. And it's really important to make sure that the spaces are implied here. And sometimes the documentation may not be clear on explicitly specifying that that is a space, and make sure that you know it's not optional, it's required. Just be aware of that. So, you almost have to take these from a literal standpoint. So here for the markup, all we have to do is hyphen space and then our custom text. So now if I go back to our scenario, it's just going to be hyphen, which is to the right of the 0 key if you're using a PC keyboard, and then a space. Oops. And I'm going to just go ahead and drop these in, and this should give us the unordered list or the bulleted list for these options. Okay, so let's just go ahead and save this. Here's another cool trick. Once you're building these out, it could be very tedious, right? Every time that you want to test a change to your Power Automate, to come here and refill out that form. They have a really cool test feature, and that's if you click on test in the top right, then click on automatic and then recent triggers, you will see that all your history of your previous tests. You can select this, rerun it by selecting and hitting test, and it will execute that same data that was submitted in that previous request that you test against, and then run that against the modifications that you have in your Power Automate. Really, really cool feature. Okay, so if I go back to Deshaun's Outlook, this should look the same. There was 0 changes here. The biggest difference is going to be within Andre. So here under the Andre profile, I click on Outlook. In this new tab, I get this request that says a request was submitted. Look at this nice bulleted list, dynamic contents coming in, and everything else looks as expected, right? So now as Andre, I can approve this. Yes, looks good. And then click submit. And actually, once I do that, it's going to fire off in here. And I brushed through that really quickly, but if you use an Outlook in the web, so Outlook in the browser versus the desktop, because desktop there's versioning requirements to get this experience, you would notice as an approver, I can embed that, I can approve and leave comments right here embedded in the email. I didn't have to leave Outlook. Another super duper convenient feature for approvers, because you don't have to context switch. You're reading emails, you see this approver request, you jump in there, you handle it, and you keep on to your next email. Really, really convenient feature. Again, it's guaranteed to work in the browser version of Outlook, granted that, let me be careful here. Granted that you're using a modern browser. And I'm hesitant because I'm not 100% on what the Safari experience may be on a Mac or an iPad. So that's one of the experiences you have to confirm. Okay, so now that we have Andre able to receive that markup, that looks great. He approved it, but we have no logic to happen after the approval. So now what we need to do, let's go back into Edit or Automate. And now we want to listen to or react to the decision made in this approval process. So to react that, we're expecting only two options. It was approve or reject it. So we need a condition, and then we just add a new step. We just grab our condition. This is like our if statement. And then I'm going to rename this to was approved. And notice I'm not going to use a question mark because you don't want to use any special characters here when naming these actions because it could throw errors that we did not anticipate. So for the choose value, the magic is going to be in this outcome token. And then the word that you're looking for is approve. It's not approve ED, it's just approve without the D. And if the outcome equals approve, we're going to fall into this yes track. If the output is anything other than approved, we're going to fall into this no track. So now once it's approved, we want to send a approval congratulatory type email to the requester. If it's not approved, we want to send the sad denied email to the requester, right? And that's going to be very similar to what I have here. Now, what I can do, I can click this add action, find my send email action, and kind of rebuild this entire piece. And that's unfortunate, right? Because I can actually reuse like 90% of this. It's only a couple words I need to change to make this an approval email. So to take advantage of that, we're going to copy this. So you just hit the ellipse here, hit copy in my clipboard. And then on this add action, instead of doing a send email, I'm going to just look at my clipboard, and any action that I copied, I can just reuse that here if it's not grayed out or disabled, as this one is. I don't know why that's the case. Let me try a refresh and see if this is going to open up for me. So now if I hit add action, check my clipboard, clipboard's empty. Let me add it again. So copy, there we go. You just needed a little touch, a little kick in the back. So now that we have this here, let me just go ahead and do some cleanup. So let me just rename this to send site request approval email. And then once I do that, I can expand it out. Now I have access to everything else. So now let me say your site request has been approved. And then here I can put this in all caps to kind of drive attention to it. And then again, like I said, 90% of this is going to be the same. So your site request has, instead of under review, once the request is approved, it will notify the request. Let's just do your site request has been approved. And then again, we just send it the details of that approval. We're going to grow into, what happens with your approve, or is this the right step after it's been immediately approved, or should we save this email until the site is actually provisioned? So, we can clean this up and worry about this in the next video. For the denial piece, we want to, again, go to my clipboard, take advantage of that confirmation email, and really just come in here and sprinkle in the pieces that make this a denial email. So send a denied request, send a site request denied email, right? Get rid of the two. And then your site request has been denied. And it's unfortunate we have to put that in all caps just to be consistent. It's hard to, you don't want to amplify the negativity, right? So, but it is what it is. So you have owner, so your site request has been denied. And you can say something like sorry, and, sorry for your luck, fix it, resubmit, or whatever the case you want to have, okay? Outside of that, I think we're done, right? So we want to test this and make sure this is going to work as expected. We may have some typos in there, but you can scan it and, remove the typos, and massage the messaging to meet your requirement. Again, I'm not going to retype and resubmit this email. The site request. I'm going to just leverage one of my past tests, and that's going to go over quickly. And then here, I get another one. All right, so let me clear this out. Empty focus. Let's just wait here. There's the second request for the approval. And now I do want to submit. Yes, looks great. Confirm that we receive our confirmation email. The approval confirmation email. So now let me switch context. Here, I got the approve. That looks great, all bold. Everything else is going to come as expected because we did a copy and paste in our send email. So now let me resend this again. And here's the other thing. When you're building these out, make sure you're testing all the conditions, right? So if you have a condition to where, you have approval requests, that's at least 2 test cases, right? One for the approve, one for the denial. If you have a switch statement where you're listening for other, let me just do reject here. Right? So that's going to be reject. But, back to the test cases, make sure you're testing all your conditions. If you have a switch statement where you have 4 or 5 conditions you need to test for, make sure you have test cases against all 4 or 5, because each one of those test cases, you just don't know. You could potentially have a bug there, and you want, as an app developer, make sure you're going through all your test cases and all those different scenarios and conditions to make sure things are working as you expect. In our case, I think we're good to go. There's our deny. It responds correctly based on the decision that was made by Andre. Now, in the next video, there's a couple of things where there's a couple of massages you want to do here, right? Especially considering and looking at this process in the lens of the end user. The first thing you want to do in that request confirmation, notice we do not have any reference to the request. Ideally, you will want to put a link here, and you easily have that available to you, right? Let me just show you a couple of these things. So here, if I just type in link, this is going to be the link to item. This is going to come through nasty, right? Because this is going to be the raw URL, and it's not 100% guaranteed that it will be hyperlinked, right? And it's up to, without you really specifying the anchor tags and things like that, it's really up to the email client if they recognize that as a URL and automatically do that anchor link for you, right? But we don't want to leave that as up to chance. We want to make that explicit. Now, in order to wrap this in the anchor tag, we have to move over into the HTML. And yes, you can absolutely clean this up and do very simple anchor tags for this. So let's just do href equals single quote. Let's just make sure that our token is the next in line and there's no extra space. And there was an extra space. Good thing we checked it. And then you do something like this, like link to request. My HTML markup is all nasty, right? So, I mean, it's really this simple. You have an anchor tag, right? Link to the request. You got the URL to that request item wrapped in the anchor tag, and you're good to go. Here's the problem, and here's the gotcha. The gotcha is, notice what happened. I lost my HTML view. I lost my WYSIWYG view that made all of this very simple to use before I added that anchor tag. Now that I have the anchor tag, what this send email action does, it locks me into HTML mode, which is very unfortunate because most of my modifications or changes here are going to be in the wording, the content, or maybe adding other items. I just added this extra layer of work because now when I make any changes here, I have to do this in HTML mode, which is nasty, right? So we're not going to do that because, again, from a maintenance perspective, we want to maintain this view and the simplicity that this brings to the table. And understand that it's going to be the same situation here everywhere that we use an email notification, because if you send them a link in the confirmation, they expect a link in the approval, and the expectation may be the link in the denial as well. So that's one. So we have to figure out how do we add in anchor tags in a elegant way to where we don't lock ourselves in. The other piece would be on the send approval. There's a couple of things on this email. Let me go back to this email. The other thing on the email is that you would notice that these emails are coming from, they're coming from the service account. And this is residue, right? You didn't see me set this up. And that's the piece I want to walk you through. Because by default, what's going to happen, whatever is the connector, the connection, and this is the other thing, we have to talk about connections and connectors and how those work. This connection is actually used as a service account. And in most scenarios, that's exactly what you want. That's the experience that you want. You don't want these email confirmations coming from the developer, aka you, as the developer of this process. You don't want your name plastered on all of these email requests and even approval requests. So the tips and tricks is going to use a service account. But let's talk through that, because there is some governance, right? And there are some best practices when you start introducing service accounts inside of this. So that's going to be another thing that we want to cover. The last thing we want to cover is going to be in your approval process. In these approval processes, right now I have this hard-coded to Andre, but what if Andre's out of the office, right? Or what if Andre is on a 2 or 3 week vacation stint? Who's going to cover? Who's going to get these email notifications? So we have to talk through what's the best practice to manage this, especially understanding that these requests can kind of go into a group, and whoever's in that group and who has the bandwidth, they would jump on it. And then we get into what happens behind the scenes when these requests are received. And the help desk or the support desk, the group that's supporting are on the other side of these site requests. How are they going to use this process to manage their day-to-day activity, right? And that's the piece that we really want to automate. And then there's going to be some other things within the request, and I think that may be our third video. But in the next one coming out, we definitely want to talk about service accounts, the best practices, how to get your name out of the from email address when sending these. 2, let's come up with a much better story with sending the approval request to the users and making sure that the group as a whole can respond to these approval requests and they're not locked in or hard-coded to one single person. All right, that's it for this video. Any questions, please leave it in the comment section. Until next time, take care of yourself.